Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I am so excited for today's video because I'm going to be trying my very first Makeup by Mario eyeshadow palette. I picked up the new Ethereal Eyes Moonlight palette, which is a cooler toned color story, very outside of my comfort zone, but I'm still excited to try it. I've heard mostly good things about his eyeshadow formula, so I really want to see how this one performs. This is going to be a first impressions. I'm also going to be including swatches, so let's go ahead and get right into it. It retails for $68 US, and it is plastic, but it does feel sturdy. It doesn't feel cheap at all. The shades don't have any actual names, but they are numbered. They describe it as an iconic Moonlight-inspired palette with 12 universal neutral shades in 4 finishes to create your most versatile ethereal looks yet. So interesting that they describe it as a neutral color story, because I feel like this is more so cool toned, but I guess you do get a few shadows that lean neutral as well. It is limited edition, and from what I've seen from his other Ethereal Eyes palette, they really do mean that it's only available for a limited time. But this palette to me is even prettier in person. I liked the images that I saw online, but having it in person, I feel like it looks even better. So I'm gonna go ahead and swatch each individual shade. I know I showed you swatches of the entire palette already using my iPhone, but I wanted to show you each shade using my camera right now. So here is shade number 1, and this one is a satin cream. This one swatched really nice and creamy, very smooth, but honestly, I don't really rely on eyeshadow swatches to tell me whether a shadow is gonna be good or not. I really just rely on how they apply on the lids, because sometimes swatches can be pretty deceiving. They don't always swatch the best, but then they perform really nicely on the lids. So that's what I'm going to be looking for today. So shade number 2 is a shimmering opal, and this one to me feels more like an eyeshadow topper, so I can see myself applying this one over top of other shades in the palette. But this shadow looks very pretty. I love all the different little flecks of glitter. Next up is shade number 3, and this is a mauve matte brown, which I think is a perfect description for this shade. This one I am very curious to try. A lot of mauvier toned eyeshadows pool a little bit warm on me, so I want to see if this one actually pools more cool toned. Here is shade number 4, and this is described as a shimmering slate. This is a really pretty smoky gray shade, and even though it does pool a little bit blue, I would say it also pools a little purple. Like I see a tiny bit of purple in there. I don't know if it's just me, maybe I'm just seeing it that way, but it's a really pretty shade. Moving into the second row, this is shade 5, and this is described as a matte gray beige. I feel like the shade descriptions are spot on, but this one to me is a straight up neutral gray shade. Here is shade number 6, and this is a shimmering bronzy gold, and this shade is absolutely stunning. I'm loving the shimmers in this palette. A lot of these come off more like toppers, which I absolutely love. Okay, so shade number 7. This might actually be my favorite shimmer in the palette so far. This is described as a shimmering taupe, and I am just a fan of shimmery taupe shades in general, but this one has some really pretty fine flecks of glitter. And then shade number 8, which is the last shade in the second row, this is described as a satin cool gray, and I'm loving the way that these satin shades swatch. They're super buttery and smooth, so they do feel a little bit creamier than just a regular matte shade. This is one of those shades that intimidates me. I don't know how this one is gonna pool against my warm complexion, so I'm excited to try this one. And then moving into the third row, this is shade number 9, and this is a matte warm brown. So interesting that they included a warmer matte shade in the palette. I feel like it kind of balances out the cooler toned shadows in the palette. The last shimmer in the palette, this is shade number 10, and this is a shimmering golden gunmetal. It does have that slight golden undertone to it while still being a gunmetal shade. Shade number 11, this one honestly, I'm kind of scared to try because I'm just not used to working with matte blue shades. This is described as a matte midnight blue. It swatches super smooth and buttery, and it's very pigmented as well. And then finally, the last shade is shade number 12, and this is a matte black. I thought it was going to be a little more pigmented. I feel like the matte blue shade is a lot more pigmented than this one, but maybe it's buildable. I'm going to have to see how this one builds up. But those are all 12 shades in the palette. I'm gonna go ahead and do a look with it now. So I'm just prepping my lids with the Rare Beauty eyeshadow primer. Let's start off with shade number 3, which is a matte mauve brown. Okay, dipping my brush into that, I do get quite a bit of kickback, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I figured I would point that out. So I'm gonna apply that into my crease. Okay, that is not pulling too cool toned at all. I feel like that is just like the perfect mauvey matte brown shade, and it's blending beautifully so far. I'm gonna build it up a little more. Yeah, that's blending out super easily. It's not patching up anywhere, but then again, it is a lighter matte shade, so I'm gonna have to see if that happens with any of the deeper shades. Sometimes that can happen with deeper matte shades. And then same thing to the other eye. This is like the perfect transition shade for a smokier eye look. It is a lighter matte shade, but I like the fact that you can build it up. So I did about 3 layers of that shade on each of my lids. Next, I'm going to take shade 5, which is a matte gray beige. I am going to tap it on the outer corner. And then once I've packed it onto my outer corner, I'm going to take whatever's left and buff it into the crease. That is a really nice deepening shade, and it is a gray, but again, it doesn't look ashy on me. I feel like this is a really nice undertone, pretty neutral. Okay, let's take shade number 8, which is that matte cool gray shade. And this one, I'm going to use a smaller brush with it. Just so that I can get more precise. So this is the Morphe M456, and I am going to tap that right on the outer corner over top of the other shade. This is a really good deepening shade, especially if you don't want to use a matte black and you don't want it to get too intense, but it blends out really nicely. So let's apply my favorite shimmer in the palette. I just really want to use this one. So shade number 7, which is the Shimmering Taupe. So I'm going to take that with my finger and tapping it on. I'm going to keep it mainly to the center because I might want to apply something on the inner portion. That is super pretty. It almost looks like it's glistening. So it has a little bit of that wet look effect while still being a shimmery powder eyeshadow, and it's adhering really nicely without any sort of glitter glue. I love that on its own, but let's test out one more shimmer. So I'm going to take shade number 10, and this is the Shimmering Bronzy Gunmetal shade. So also applying that with my finger, and I'm going to focus it on the inner portion of the lid and just kind of layering it where the other shade ends. I'm actually surprised that I'm not having any sort of fallout so far. Maybe I've been pretty gentle today compared to other times, but I usually get some sort of fallout whenever I use shimmers, but I'm not noticing any so far. This to me so far is something that I would wear for maybe like New Year's or just some sort of like holiday party. I'm going to take shade number 8 and apply that to my lower lash line. And I'm using the BK Beauty Nikki LaRose N12 brush. I'm going to keep this mainly on the outer corner, sort of connecting it to the outer corner on the lid. And then using the Morphe JH39 brush, which is more like a pencil brush, I'm going to take shade number 3 and starting more so on the middle of the lash line, I'm packing it on and then dragging it out to blend out the gray shade. And then cleaning off the brush on a color switch, I'm going to take shade number 5 and I am going to use that to further blend out the lower lash line. I really want to try shade number 6, which is the more golden bronzy shade in the palette. So I am going to apply that to the inner portion of the lower lash line. I'm going to take another pencil brush, but this one is from ColourPop. This is the E28. So I'm going to pop that onto the inner portion of the lower lash line and sort of connect it to the middle and the inner corner. Okay, that looks really pretty. I know I have a lot of cooler tone shadows on the lid, but this shade isn't super warm toned. It does lean a little bit neutral, so it kind of just balances everything out. So I quite like that. Let's apply the lightest shimmer in the palette to the inner corners. So shade number 2, which is the Shimmering Opal. And this one does pull a little bit like bluish, which I think is going to look really pretty. So I'm going to use the Morphe JH41 brush. And I'm going to drag it into the inner crease. So sort of like pushing it into the crease, but keeping it right on the inner edge. That is absolutely gorgeous. I'm loving it as an inner corner highlight. And I think it's going to look super pretty with the bluer tone shadows in the palette. Let me do some black liner really quickly. I really want to try this black shade because it didn't swatch super pigmented, but let's see how it performs. Taking the BK Beauty N11 brush. So I am just stamping it on and keeping it really tight to the upper lash line. Yeah, it does seem to be pretty buildable because I did try to build it up more on this side and it is looking like a deeper matte black shade. So that's a nice matte black shade overall. I guess I'll have to keep playing with it and see how like deep it can really go. I'm gonna go ahead and apply some mascara now and a lip color as well. And I'll gather my thoughts and come back to tell you what I think of this palette so far. All right, so here is the completed makeup look. I've gathered my thoughts. And on my lips, I have on the Makeup by Mario Sculpting Lip Pencil in the shade Toasty, which is a pinky brown. I love this lip liner. And I paired it with the Smashbox Always On Liquid Lipstick in the shade Stepping Out, another pinky brown shade, but this one is a little bit more nude. So I think they paired really nicely together. But as for my thoughts on the Makeup by Mario Ethereal Eyes Moonlight palette, I was trying to think of some pros and cons about this palette, but honestly, I can't think of anything bad to say about it. Now, keep in mind, this is my first Makeup by Mario eyeshadow palette, so I don't have any of his other palettes to compare to. I can't say that this is redundant because in my opinion, this is very unique to my makeup collection. I don't have a lot of palettes like this. Maybe if you have a deeper complexion, some of the shades in here might pull a little bit too ashy on you, but I think it does go pretty deep. But I guess some of the lighter matte shades might be a little bit too light for some people, which is completely understandable. But I do think it's gonna work across a variety of different skin tones, both fair and deep. I like that it doesn't go extremely cool toned to the point where they pull ashy on my skin tone. A lot of these shades are actually pretty neutral, and I do like the fact that it has a matte brown warm shade. I really wasn't expecting it to have a shade like that. When I had first seen images of this palette, I really thought it was a completely cool tone palette, but in person it does lean more neutral, and they actually do describe it as a neutral palette. The matte shades in here blend beautifully. I honestly didn't have any issues with them. Even this cooler toned gray shade over here, I was a little scared to use this one, not gonna lie, but I ended up liking it a lot to deepen up the outer corners. I thought it was gonna be maybe a little bit patchy just because of my experience with other gray shades in the past, but I didn't have any issues with it. I really took my time and blended it out, and it looked really nice and smooth on the outer corners. It's a really nice deepening shade if you don't want to use anything too deep, but it still gives enough depth. So I'm really happy with the mattes in here. No issues so far. And actually, I did use this shade over here, the Satin Cream. I applied it to my brow bone and I kind of used it to buff out the edges of the crease. So it did add a little bit of brightness, but not as much as I was expecting. It's not a super brightening shade on me, but if you have a deeper skin tone, I feel like this shade is gonna be really nice and brightening. The only two matte shades that I didn't use in today's look is the matte blue shade and the matte warm brown. So I'm excited to try those in a future look. Now, as far as the shimmers, I would say the shimmers in here are definitely my favorite because they are extremely shimmery and ethereal. And I love that the shimmer is super finely milled. They just give some really pretty dimension to the lids. I love the shade number 2. I like the fact that it pulls a little bit blue, and I like that it has some different colored shimmer particles in there. So it just looks super beautiful, especially as an inner corner highlight. And of course, I'm really loving shade number 7, which is the Shimmering Taupe. I'm already a huge fan of shimmery taupe shades, So this one surpassed my expectations. I think if you don't have any other Makeup by Mario palettes, you're really gonna enjoy this one, and especially if you like cooler tone shadows, but you also want a little bit of neutral in there. Let me know how you guys feel about this one if you already own some other Makeup by Mario palettes. But so far, my experience has been nothing but positive, and I purchased this with my own money. It's not sponsored at all. I am not trying to make it seem like this palette is gonna be perfect for everyone because everyone's tastes are different. So even though this palette for me is worth the money, it might not be worth the money for you. But let me know your comments down below. I had a lot of fun playing with this today. I'm loving this eyeshadow look. It's very smoky. It's definitely what I was going for. I really hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.